I think one of the main reasons for the decline is churches are not willing to change. They're not willing to adjust and understand that, if you don't change, then you're going to eventually die out.
You are listening to Our Urban Voices with Dr. Alphonse Javed, a podcast that presents Christian narratives through diverse voices that impact urban ministry. Here is your host.
Hello and welcome back to our show, Our Urban Voices. I'm your host, Dr. Alphonse Javed. Today I am joined by Mark Lee, who has served in ministry for 25 years. He is a pastor who serves at Central Steele Creek Presbyterian Church, and he's a graduate of Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, PA. And I'm so happy to have him here. And as always, I'm going to ask him to introduce himself, give us a little bit of background on his life and ministry. So thank you for joining us today, Mark. How you doing?
Thank you, Alphonse. Thank you for having me. I'm doing very well. This is a privilege to be with you on this podcast. It's a little cold here in Charlotte, North Carolina, colder than normal, but we're doing well.
Good. So before we get started, please tell us very briefly about your family, a little bit about your background. I believe a family is so important because it helps us to humanize us. And I think your audience will connect with you better if they know a little bit about your background, ministry,
Sure.
as well as your family. So share a little bit about that.
Sure. I'm what they call like the second generation Korean American immigrant. My parents immigrated here in the late 70s, early 80s. I grew up in America. I was born in South Korea, but I came to the States when I was little. So I'm much more comfortable with the American culture and the English language. But I do speak and understand Korean. I married a bilingual Korean American woman. And so my wife, Minah, we've been married for 25 years. This past October, we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. So we've been married for 25 years. My wife is a music teacher here in Charlotte School District. We have three children. Technically, age-wise, they're all adults, but they're still our children, and sometimes they behave like children. But our oldest, our daughter, Karis, she recently, this past spring, graduated from college and is working right now for the school system here in Charlotte. And we have two boys, Michael and Matthew. Michael is a junior at UNC Chapel Hill, and his younger brother, Matthew, he's a freshman at the same school, UNC Chapel Hill. So it's good that they both go to the same school, so we just pick them up and drop them off at the same location.
That's fantastic. I got four children, and I'm way behind your family growth. My oldest is now 7. The podcast's been going on for some time, and they have heard about him when he was 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, now 7. So it's good. One is 7, then 5, and my girls, twin girls, are 3. So,
Oh, wow.
but
Twin girls. Yeah.
yeah,
My
but I
goodness.
was thinking about your school is better that you just drop them off and pick them up. We have to drop them off at 2 different locations, 2 different schools, and then pick them up about the same time. So one is always in the office. You have to go and pick them up from there. And the administration understands that.
Very good.
Let me bring our audience on board with the background of this conversation. You are finishing your doctorate, and the topic is excellent topic. Feel free to talk about that. So I just wanted to let the audience know that most of the questions are extracted from your research, your document, and may the Lord bless you, and as you finish your doctorate and one day this dissertation will become available. Let's start with very simple questions from your dissertation. As we are both senior pastors of churches, we are aware of disturbing trends in traditional American churches. Would you please summarize, for the sake of our audience, summarize these trends for us?
The biggest trend that's taken place probably in the last couple of years, and I saw this during my research process, is that for the first time ever in the history of the American church attendance or membership, it's gone below 50% in America for the first time. You have this disturbing trend where attendance and membership in the church has been declining for the past 30 years, but it was still above 50%. Now it has gone below 50% of the population. We're talking about adults. We're not talking about children, but adult membership in the church has gone below 50% for the first time ever. And so that is a shocking statistic, first of all. And then I'm an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church of USA, and our denomination has been declining in attendance and membership steadily for the past 30 years as well. So the trend that's been going on from a larger macro perspective in regards to church attendance is also affecting on a micro level from our presbytery, PCUSA. It's been going down and down. And one of the most heartbreaking trend that I saw in my recent presbytery meeting here in Charlotte Presbytery, we used to have, I think, about 140 or 150 churches about 20 years ago. 20 years later, now we're down to, I think, 91 or 92 churches. And among those 90 plus churches, about half of them don't have a pastor. Some of them have pulpit supply or temporary part-time pastors, but about half of those churches do not have a full-time pastor. And some of them haven't had one for many years, and because they can't afford to hire a pastor, a call full-time pastor. So, and a lot of those churches are on the verge of closing their doors probably in the next several years, or even sooner than that. And so I don't think that's just unique to what's going on in our presbytery in Charlotte, but I think that's probably very much the same case throughout the country. The decline of the traditional white Protestant church, it's been going on for many, many years. And some churches are not willing to change, and they're going to face the difficulty of having to close their doors.
As we continue to pray for the church, in the global setting, I pray, may the Lord continue to watch over your denomination as well. It's a sad reality of the church in the United States, I think.
Yeah.
What would you say are the major contributing factors to these trends?
Before becoming the senior pastor at my current church, I moved to Charlotte to be an associate pastor at another traditional white church here in Charlotte. And when I came, I didn't fully understand what was going on in that church, but my position had to be dissolved because they didn't have the funds to pay me. The senior pastor of that church that I was looking forward to working with abruptly quit a few weeks before I was supposed to move here with my family. So that church has gone through 30 years of decline as well. They used to have about 700 to 800 members even 15 years ago, but they were down to, on paper, less than 200 on paper, but probably active membership we're looking at probably under 100, maybe even closer to 70 or 80. And what happened with that church is they just kept doing the same thing over and over again. And they refused to change anything, the worship, the vision, the culture of the church. And so when I came on board, the session members approached me and asked me, what can we do to attract younger families? Because they had no young families in the church. And I said, well, the way you are worshiping, this might be very comfortable for people in their 60s and 70s and 80s, but this is not going to be something that will be able to attract some younger generation, because you're doing such liturgically heavy worship service where you're reciting all kinds of different prayers of this and prayers of that. While the young people today, they don't even know the Apostles' Creed. So when you're bringing that up and you're using the creed of this and creed of that, that worship's not going to be something that the younger generation is able to identify with. So we were trying to have more of a blended worship service, including music. We were in the process of doing that when I realized the church doesn't have the funds to pay me, and then we had to come to a very difficult understanding of that. But I think one of the main reasons for the decline is churches are not willing to change. Yeah. They're not willing to adjust and understand that, if you don't change, then you're going to eventually die out. I mean, you look at everything else around the world, whether it's corporations or schools or even professional sports teams. You don't see, successful football teams running wing T offense. They're running the more modern offense. I grew up in Philadelphia. I'm a huge fan of the Eagles. I know you're in Jersey, so you probably hear about the Eagles quite a bit, or you might be a fan. But You look at the modern day football teams or any sports teams, and it's nothing like the way they used to play 10, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, Steph Curry came out and played in a way where, wow, you can't do that. But he revolutionized how basketball is played in the last 10, 15 years now. So change needs to take place. Sometimes the pace of that change needs to be sensitive to the people that are there. But without change, you're going to see traditional churches continue to close their doors.
Well, let's move to the next question I have for you. The homogeneous unit principle of church growth has been thought of as the most effective way to multiply disciples and plant churches. People feel comfortable with people who have things in common with themselves. How has this idea helped or hurt the growth of the church?
Well, I'll take our church, for example. 30 years ago, this was a farming community. I mean, I hear from our members, tell me like, many years ago, as they're worshiping, they can see the cow from their members' farm escape. So a bunch of men run out to try to, corral them and put it back into their farm. This was a farming community, and it was very homogeneous. It was typical white community. And so, it's not like they were planning to be a white-only church. That's who lives here. That's who lived here, and that's the type of people that surrounded the church up until 30 years ago. But about 30 years ago, you began to see the transformation of the community. It's no longer a white community. In fact, it's in my dissertation, the census that's been taken in the past 30 years, how much it has changed. And now the white population is not the dominant population. You have a lot of different ethnic background. The white population is probably now less than a third in our community. And so you've seen this incredible change in the makeup and the diversity of the community. But the church did not change with the changing landscape of the community. So while homogeneous scope of the church was great because everybody was white. When you don't change and understand the need to embrace the diversity of the community, then people are not going to be drawn to a church where you're looked at differently because you're not white, or the church is not openly, willingly to embrace diversity. Then you're not going to get people to come to church from the community who are not white. So while homogeneous focus may have been there, it might have been there indirectly, because you don't need to make it a focal point because everyone's white already, but you need to make diversity a focal point and part of the church's vision, because otherwise you're not going to be able to change in that direction. So I think we're just one part of the community in the country where this is taking place. Every community is going through it. Unless you live in the mountains of West Virginia, I think even there, I think there's some diversity these days. Wow. So it's part of the changing landscape of our communities that you have to be able to embrace.
Why is tried and true no longer an effective strategy in promoting church growth and discipleship?
Well, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. You see the decline of the church. The churches that have refused to change and have continued to do what they did 20, 30 years ago, they're not just declining, but they are in the verge of closing their doors. I mean, we've had, 50, 60 churches close in our presbytery here in Charlotte in the last 20 to 25 years. And all of them were, traditional white churches or traditional historically Black churches. They're the ones that close their doors. Very homogeneous churches. The churches that are growing here in Charlotte, and I'm sure it's probably the case in Jersey and throughout the country, the churches that are growing are the ones that are non-denominational, more diverse churches. They seem to be the ones that are growing. But the tried and true way of doing, 30 years ago, you build a new church in the community. If you to borrow from the famous movie, if you build it, they'll come. if you put up a church, they came because that was the center of the community. That was the center of the communal fellowship for that community. But that is no longer the case. And that hasn't been the case for 30 years. So, when you're doing, a lot of churches continue to do traditional churches. They have the Wednesday gatherings. They have a meal first and then Bible study for the adults, for the kids. A lot of churches used to do that on Wednesday night. That hasn't worked for the past 20 years because kids are busy with a lot of different activities. Parents are busy and tired coming home from work because now we have many more two-income families rather than just fathers working. And also, people don't want to go to church on a Wednesday night when they're tired, when they can be home, when there's a lot of other distractions around them that keep them away from the church. So you see so many traditional churches now have gone away from meeting on Wednesday nights. Well, that's something that drew people to church before, but now it's not working the way it used to.
Yeah. So life is, I think in general, life is more difficult in the United States. Is more, I think it's also faster. Life
Sure.
situations have changed because there is diverse problems. It's not one or two type. It's not just like, person is sick. Now we have very different types of issues that families are facing just because the information that is pouring into any household because of the social media presence, because of the fast-paced information we receive and all the other things. And part of that is people are busy, as you said that too, because the demand is different. Even those who are working from home, sometimes they are working and communities have grown and the economical situation has changed. So it's not a loyalty-based America
Right.
where you were working for a company and you died and your son got the job and you continue. By and large, it's not the case anymore. So it's like you reach a certain age and they're going to kick you out. Not partially it is because technology is changing and they want to bring, and partly is because they can find people who can do the same job for less. So you have all these different components happening. And as you said, things are changing. So change is necessary for every organization. So sometimes they are letting people go because they can't afford the previous structure or traditional way of doing what they were doing unless they're willing to die with lack of change or transformation within their organization. So there are a bunch of things that are happening in corporate America and American household. It's affected by that. So
yeah, I mean, and also even though there are external changes taking place, but also I think Christians or church members, their hearts and minds and their faith, the commitment level is also it's changed. They're not as committed. I mean, you can see that. So I look at my parents who I grew up in a Korean church, Korean American church, a very large Korean American church in the suburb of Philadelphia. I see my parents. I mean, my parents used to go to church like 3-4 times a week. There was the Wednesday service, Friday night prayer gathering, obviously Sunday. And my father was an elder of the church. I would have breakfast, lunch, and dinner at church. I because obviously I was little. I didn't drive, so we got to go with them. I wanted to be home to watch Eagles games, but no, I had to be at church because I can't drive. I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner at church because in Korean church back then they used to have 7 o'clock evening worship, and my father had all kinds of meetings, and my mom had meetings. So we're in the gym playing basketball with other kids of elders and deacons and hanging out at church all day. I mean, we loved it when we were younger, but as we became teenagers, it became difficult to deal with. And then as soon as we got, my driver's license, we take 2 cars and we're home after the service and they're there all day. But I think the level of commitment from our previous generation to the generation currently completely different. I see it in our members as well. We have 80, 70, 60-year-old members, very committed. Very committed. But the younger generation, I don't see the level of commitment. And part of that is they're so busy with their daily lives.
Yeah. And I think that's what it is. For some reason, the world is more busy today that it seems like than previously when they woke up early morning to go in the
Yep.
field and do those things. And now
Right.
all those produce are available to us, even online. You can just order things online. You don't even
Correct.
have to go and get it from Walmart or Costco or
Correct.
whatever other
Right.
local market you have. Yet people are busy,
Yep.
busy. So that's one of the biggest issue we're dealing with. So as a church seeking to reflect the ethnic diversity of surrounding community, what are some of the challenges that may arise?
Probably the biggest barrier for, like our churches, people know us as a traditional white church.
Hmm.
That's what they've known this church for. And not only do we look like a white church inside, we look like it on the outside too. So the way the campus is, way the buildings are. So we're doing a lot to try to promote this new vision and new ministry paradigm that we have, and we've been, somewhat successful. I mean, obviously, hiring a Korean American pastor to be the pastor of the church is going to be a big sign to the community. Hey, we're no longer a white church. Fighting that historical picture of the church is one barrier. Probably another barrier is because the church has declined so much in the past 30 years, trying to attract younger families. In the church, when I came, there were no young families, virtually none. Some that they had, they all left. And so trying to attract young families into a church that doesn't have young families was very difficult. We have some now, but they say that if it took the church 30 years to decline to that level, it's going to take twice as long to get back to what it was before. This is a very slow process, but sometimes we want to see results right away because that's the kind of time we live in, instant gratification. But we struggle with not seeing the results as quickly as possible, including wanting to become diverse in our congregation. So we have to be very, very patient and methodical and systematic from a spiritual perspective, and to grow the church to that. But that is a challenge, not growing as fast as we want to.
Yeah.
So those are some of the barriers that we face, right off the bat.
And I think it's almost every study will tell you, especially those church planting and replanting experts, they talk about this idea that it's difficult to grow a church, a dying church, grow that, than a planted new church. If a new church opens up across the street, that will probably bring more people in than the church that existing. And now the struggle is when new church planters. So most of my ministry was in New York City. It's just last years that I've been here in New Jersey. But before that, in New York, we will receive church planters every day. New church planters are coming, new movements are coming. And the issue was the old ones are dying and the new ones are gaining people, only to know after 10 years they are dying and now the new ones are coming. So we were struggling with the new idea that how to motivate the new upcoming church planters to help the existing declining churches and sort of like replant those churches and collaborate, which is a difficult thing because they have a different vision. And then the problem that you already mentioned earlier, those churches are dying because of a reason, and that reason is a lack of clarity what needs to be changed. And I often talk to my staff, and I heard it somewhere too, that it's not, people are not afraid of change. They're afraid of the problem is the surprise. When you surprise them with the change, that causes them that hesitation while they're. And I think overall, we need to change this narrative too, rather than planting new churches, which I'm pro planting new churches 100%. If anything works, let's work on that. But also kind of like removing that hesitation that you can't work with the old church. You should. If they are there, they've been around, they know the ins and outs of that community. And if they are willing to change, it's good to work with them too. You did mention about this idea, the outside, and you talk about the campus. I assume that the way the campus looked. Briefly talk about that. What do you mean by that? Even the outside looked as if the church is the white church. Is there a appearance issue
Oh,
when it comes to
yeah.
a diverse church versus a old traditional Caucasian church?
Yeah, I mean, our church sanctuary building is straight out of the 1960s and 70s. Steeple and the way it looks, walk in, the wooden pews, choir loft in the back, and then in a small area where just enough space for a pastor to stand. After I came, we incorporated some contemporary music. We have a new music director who has a praise team, and we use different instruments. We have no space for that because the choir loft is for the choir, so you can't really have musicians up there, and so. And we have a big pipe organ right in the middle. I don't wear a robe. I don't even wear a suit when I preach. But if you walk into our sanctuary, people will see right. Oh, this is a very traditional church, but we're not anymore. We're not. But as soon as you walk in, that is the first thing that you'll notice. And so on the outside as well, on the outside, it looks like a very traditional white church. And so we are trying to slowly make some changes to that, but it's going to take time. And not only is it going to take time, it's going to take resource funds to do it. So we're right now in the process of trying to change the sanctuary, especially the front of it, getting rid of the choir loft and all that, and expanding the pulpit stage area to come forward more, so we have more space for praise team and singers and instruments like drummers and guitar players and bass players, things like that, so that we can incorporate more of the musicians in doing so. But the church has been struggling with this for past 15 years. When they put a team together, a task force to do a study and see how they can make these changes. So they've been talking about it for 15 years. And finally, now we're ready to do something about it from a practical standpoint. So hopefully it's not too late.
Yeah. So what I understand is it doesn't mean that the outside has somehow communicating that this is a white American church. That's not the issue. The issue is the traditional church approach. It looks
Correct.
like traditional.
Correct.
So you are
Yeah.
bringing contemporary, because you could be a diverse congregation and yet have that same. You could be a monoethnic group. I know that African American churches are very traditional. Many
Yep.
of them are,
Yep.
especially
Yep.
Baptist churches. Same thing is true for Korean churches. You
Yeah.
have a lot of Presbyterian Korean churches that take that same route.
Correct.
So what we are talking about is not that as much as contemporary versus traditional.
Correct.
To
Yeah.
just allow people. I understand that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what are the short-term and long-term implications of a church embracing diversity? Let's talk about that.
Well, I think the short term is what we've gone through in the last, 4 years since I've been here. I mean, about 2.5 years of that has been in COVID. So I don't know if it can be an accurate assessment of the short term implication, but I do believe in the short term, when you are trying to encourage a very traditional white church to embrace the diversity aspect of the community, what's going to happen is the changes that we've made, we have that those changes have caused some of the people to say, this is not what I want. What I want is what we had before. And so we've had members, longtime members, some of them very long-time members, say, I don't want to be part of this church. I mean, they try to fight it as much as they can, but when they recognize that they are a very small minority, they said, okay, that's it. And they left because they didn't get it their way. They didn't get it. They didn't get their old church the way they wanted it, because they were happy with what they were getting out of it. Even though the church has been declining for many, many years, they were satisfied with it because they were getting out from the church what they wanted. While the rest of the people realized, we can't keep going like this. We're going to end up closing the door. But, I had one member who, her line to me each time she came to speak to me in the office was, I've been a member here for 60 years. That was usually the first line that she would begin with, and then begin to share some of her displeasures of the changes that are taking place. And she wanted certain things back that we changed. And I told her, is this what you want, or is this what the church wants? And she's like, well, I don't know what the church wants, but this is what I want. And so when she didn't get them, she finally decided that she's going to leave the church. So I think the short-term implication is you're going to have some upset people who are not satisfied, and people who are going to not only just leave, but they're going to leave with their pocketbooks, and they're going to let the church know that they are leaving with their pocketbook. Long-term implication, if the church can kind of go through the storms and be able to implement the vision of, having the diverse community be a part of the church's vision through outreach and through worship service, through fellowship, and making the point of letting them know that we are a community church and this is our community. I think the long-term implication is you will have people coming by to check out the church, especially to see what kind of changes have taken place. I do believe that if the church can weather the storm and go through some of these difficult years, I think you'll see some younger people of different ethnicity and part of the community coming to the church. But it's tough to get through that storm. And a lot of churches who are going through these changes and through these process, many of them don't come out on the other side because it's just too difficult. And they don't have the resource to continue to move forward from a financial standpoint. And so if we can weather the storm, I do believe that we can come out and be able to be a community church, not a traditional white church anymore.
So there are short-term issues that we have to deal with, and then there are long-term issues that we need to deal with if we are willing to embrace diversity. And the United States is changing drastically, and God is bringing people from all sorts of places to the United States. And this is the job of the church, to realize that God is bringing nations to our doors, and we need to be ready to embrace them. We'll continue this topic in our next episode, part 2. But for now, we're going to end this episode. Thank you so much for being on the show again. That was Mark Lee talking about growing and changing churches in diverse community. If you learned something, have a topic suggestion, or would like to leave us feedback, drop us a note at oururbanvoices.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show and leave an honest review wherever you listen to your podcast. Tune in 2 weeks to listen to the second part of this conversation with Mark.
You've been listening to Our Urban Voices with Dr. Alphonse Javed, which presents Christian narratives through diverse voices that impact urban ministry.